Another day, another story. Dive into the world of America's most beloved crustaceans. When the first European settlers reached North America, lobsters were so plentiful that they would reportedly wash ashore in piles up to 2 feet high. Their bounty made them a precious source of sustenance during hard times, and gave them a lowbrow reputation as the poor man's protein. Dirt cheap because they were so copious, lobsters were routinely fed to prisoners, apprentices, slaves and children during the colonial era and beyond. Welcome to Tabot Eminent Channel. In Massachusetts, some servants allegedly sought to avoid lobster-heavy diets by including stipulations in their contracts that they would only be served the shellfish twice a week. These crustaceans were so plentiful that they would wash up in heaps along the shore after storms, often piling up to several feet high. Lobsters as a poor man's food. In the 17th and 18th centuries, lobsters were considered a low-quality food. They were so abundant that they were primarily used to feed the poor, prisoners, and indentured servants. Some historical accounts even mention that feeding lobster to prisoners more than a few times a week was considered cruel and unusual punishment. Early uses. Lobsters were also used as fertilizer in fields and as bait for fishing. Indigenous peoples were among the first to use lobsters as a reliable food source, often cooking them by roasting them over a fire or boiling them in seawater. Native Americans used lobsters in their both fishing and agriculture. American Indians of the eastern seaboard used lobsters to fertilize their crops and bait their fishing hooks. They also ate the abundant crustaceans, preparing them by covering them in seaweed and baking them over hot rocks. According to tradition, this cooking method inspired the classic New England clambake. Fishing practices. Bait for fishing. Native Americans used lobsters as bait to catch larger fish, such as cod. The strong scent and durability of lobster meat made it an effective choice for luring fish. Direct consumption. Lobsters were a reliable food source, especially in coastal areas where they were abundant. Native Americans would cook them over open fires or in pits lined with hot stones, often as part of larger communal meals. Agricultural techniques. Fertilizer for crops. Native Americans recognized the value of lobsters as a natural fertilizer. They buried lobster shells and unused parts in the soil, particularly when planting crops like corn, beans, and squash. The decaying lobster remains enriched the soil with nutrients, promoting healthy plant growth. This method is an early example of sustainable farming practices, utilizing natural resources efficiently and minimizing waste. Resource management. Native Americans practiced sustainable harvesting of lobsters, taking only what was needed to maintain balance in the ecosystem. This ensured a steady supply of lobsters and other marine resources for future generations. The settlers later adopted many of these practices, particularly using lobsters as fertilizer during the early years of colonization when food supplies were scarce. These ingenious uses highlight the deep ecological knowledge and resourcefulness of Native American communities. Lobsters collection has evolved over time. At first, lobsters were gathered by hand along the shoreline. In the late 1700s, special boats known as smacks, which featured tanks with holes that allowed seawater to circulate, were introduced in Maine to transport live lobsters. The workers who operated these shellfish-friendly vessels were known as smackmen. It was not until the mid-19th century that lobster trapping, also first practiced in Maine, became a more popular way to collect the sea creatures. The first lobster pound, a cordoned-off cove or tank where fresh lobster are stored in the water while awaiting sale, was established in a tidal creek in Vinalhaven, Maine, in 1875. The town is still home to a thriving lobster fishery. Early methods. Manual collection. Native American practices. Native Americans harvested lobsters by hand or by spearing them in shallow tidal pools. They used simple tools and relied on their deep understanding of the local ecosystem. Colonial settlers. Early European settlers also collected lobsters manually from the shore or shallow waters, where they were found in great abundance. After storms, lobsters were often gathered in large quantities from beaches. Transition to traps. Early traps, 19th century. the first lobster traps were introduced in the early 1800s in Maine and Nova Scotia. These traps, made of wood, were simple rectangular or barrel-shaped structures with an opening for lobsters to enter but not escape. Traps were baited with fish to lure the lobsters and were checked daily by fishers. Industrialization and spread. By the mid-19th century, trapping had become the primary method of lobster fishing, coinciding with the growing demand for lobsters as a delicacy. Modern lobster trapping material improvements. Traps evolved from wooden designs to more durable wire mesh constructions in the 20th century, making them longer lasting and more effective. Modern traps often include escape vents to allow undersized lobsters to exit, supporting sustainable practices. Boat and gear advances. Powered lobster boats equipped with winches and hydraulic haulers allow fishers to deploy and retrieve multiple traps quickly. GPS and sonar technology are used to locate lobster-rich areas efficiently. Lobsters can be cannibalistic. Once they make it into tight quarters of store display tanks, lobsters can display cannibalistic instincts. Sellers tightly band their claws to prevent them from feasting on their neighbors. Evidence of cannibalism captivity. Lobsters in tanks, particularly those without adequate food or space, are more prone to cannibalistic behavior. To mitigate this, fishers often band their claws in holding tanks. Wild observations. Instances of lobster cannibalism have been observed in the wild, though less frequently than in captivity. This is largely because the ocean environment provides more space and food variety. Scientific studies. Researchers studying lobster diets have found evidence of cannibalism in their stomach contents, suggesting it occurs naturally but opportunistically. They eventually became a delicacy. Lobster began to shed some of its negative reputation and gain a following among discriminating diners, particularly in Boston and New York City, during the 1880s. Prices immediately began to rise. Because lobster was considered a delicacy when World War II began, it was not rationed. The booming wartime economy allowed wealthy cravers of crustaceans to consume them at unprecedented rates. Though considered a rich and decadent food, lobster meat contains fewer calories than an equal portion of skinless chicken breast. It also boasts healthy omega-3 fatty acids, potassium and the vitamins E, B12 and B6. Their size and age will surprise you. American lobsters, or Maine lobsters, as they are commonly known, can weigh more than 40 pounds and grow up to 3 feet long. The largest lobster on record was caught off Nova Scotia in 1988. It weighed in at 44 pounds and was 42 inches long. Scientists believe it was at least 100 years old, twice the lifespan of the average lobster. Lobsters are known for their unusual anatomy. Lobster anatomy has changed little over the last 100 million years. Its brain is located in its throat, its nervous system in its abdomen, teeth in its stomach and kidneys in its head. It also hears using its legs and tastes with its feet. One of the few things lobsters have in common with humans: they tend to favor one front limb, meaning they can be right-clawed or left-clawed. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.